Burnt Truths is a special investigative series from the Ultraviolet Tide podcast presented by Low Ultraviolet. While Burnt Truths uncovers the surprising history, marketing myths, and cultural forces that shaped our relationship with tanning and sun exposure, Low Ultraviolet helps you protect your skin with confidence. Low Ultraviolet is the first and only sun-safe marketplace, bringing together a thoughtfully curated collection of UPF apparel, SPF products, and sun protection essentials all in one place. Discover trusted brands like MD Solar Sciences, Line in the Sand, Sun Patch, and Low Ultraviolet's own line of UPF 50+ essentials designed to make sun safety effortless and stylish. Because knowing the truth about sun damage is only half the story. Having the tools to protect yourself is the other half. Visit Low Ultraviolet and shop smarter sun protection today at lowultraviolet.com. Behind every tanning bed is an industry that fights to keep you glowing, no matter the cost. From misleading advertising and questionable health claims to a new generation of wellness services, today we follow the money that keeps the bulbs burning. For the past 3 episodes, we've explored the history of tanning, the invention of the modern tanning bed, and the deeply personal stories of ex-tanning bed users whose pursuit of the perfect glow ended in a melanoma diagnosis. But their stories aren't unique. As of 2015, over a third of adults in the US have used tanning beds at least once in their lifetime, and there is an entire industry that profits every single time the lid closes. When the public started questioning health impacts, the tanning industry didn't disappear. Instead, they found new ways to sell the glow. Today, we're exposing the truth behind the industry that burned us. Last episode, we drew a parallel between 2 industries that, at first glance, might seem unrelated: cigarettes and tanning beds. But the more you examine their histories, the more similarities begin to emerge. Both industries sold products that became deeply embedded in our culture. Both profited from behaviors that became habitual. Both faced mounting scientific evidence connecting their products to cancer. And lastly, and arguably the most important, both had a financial incentive to keep consumers coming back. These similarities bring up a sobering question. What is a human life worth to an industry that profits from a product known to cause cancer? According to one analysis of the economics of the tobacco industry, cigarette manufacturers make about a penny in profit for every cigarette sold. In other words, from a purely economic perspective, the value of a human life to a cigarette manufacturer could be calculated by how many more cigarettes that person might buy. It is an uncomfortable way to think about business, but it's the reality that industries respond to demand, and most importantly, they respond to money. The tanning industry is, of course, not the tobacco industry, but the question raised by the comparison is worth asking. What happens when an industry's financial success depends on convincing people to continue a behavior that science has shown causes cancer? To understand that, we have to go back to what the tanning industry was really selling, and it wasn't just a tan. In episode 2, we explored how tanning became deeply intertwined with beauty culture. From the French Riviera to Hollywood, bronze skin transformed from a marker of outdoor labor into a symbol of leisure, wealth, and health. By the time commercial tanning beds entered the picture in the 1970s, the industry didn't have to convince people to want to tan. Decades of evolving beauty standards had already created that demand. The industry simply needed to make tanning more convenient and accessible to the everyday consumer. And at the time, there was little reason for the everyday consumer to worry. Remember that Friedrich Wolf introduced the world's first commercial indoor tanning bed in 1975, and it was designed to produce a healthy, year-round tan. His vision was rooted in wellness to mimic sunlight, combat seasonal depression, and stimulate vitamin D production. That was the public perception for years. Widespread public concern about the connection between tanning beds and skin cancer didn't begin to gain significant traction until the late 1980s. So perhaps it's not surprising that a 1981 print advertisement for Clothson tanning beds featured a bronze woman in a blue bikini alongside a tanning bed with the bold promise, tan safer than the sun. Get your beautiful dark tan year-round. The message was simple. You can have the tan you wanted, whenever you wanted, without having to depend on the weather and without risking your health. But eventually, the scientific evidence surrounding UV exposure became increasingly difficult to ignore. As research linked UV exposure to skin cancer and premature aging, the tanning industry's promise of a convenient year-round glow became more difficult to sell without addressing the risks. And consumers began to change too, because for the first time, the tanning industry was facing competition from something that could deliver the very thing people had been buying from tanning salons for decades: a tan, this time without the UV exposure. Spray tans and self-tanning products had been around for years, which we'll dive into more next episode. But advances in formulas and application technology transformed them from streaky, orange products of the past into something far more appealing. Mousses, lotions, tanning waters, facial drops, and professional spray tans gave consumers another way to achieve that bronze look they wanted. The industry didn't simply disappear, it adapted. Many tanning salons began expanding beyond traditional UV tanning, adding spray tans, skincare treatments, and more recently, red light therapy. The business model started to evolve from simply selling a tan to trying to sell an entire beauty experience. And that evolution was interesting because the tanning industry didn't necessarily have to abandon the desire for bronze skin, and it didn't fully have to change how it delivered it either. But there was another problem. The science wasn't just changing consumer behavior, it was also changing public policy. In 2009, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified UV-emitting tanning devices as Group 1 carcinogens. The evidence had become increasingly difficult to dismiss. And once the risks were being recognized not just by researchers and doctors, but by governments and public health organizations, the stakes became much higher. Because how do you continue to sell a product when consumers are becoming aware of its risks? The industry pushed back. Industry groups challenged proposed restrictions, lobbyists fought regulation, and the language surrounding tanning emphasized ideas like responsible tanning and controlled exposure. The argument didn't necessarily have to be that tanning beds were completely risk-free. Instead, the conversation could shift toward personal choice. Consumers should be allowed to decide whether the risk was worth taking. That was an important distinction because regulation threatened more than the tanning habits. It threatened revenue. In 2010, under the Obama administration, the Affordable Care Act introduced a 10% federal excise tax on indoor tanning services. The tax applied to amounts paid for indoor tanning services and took effect for services provided after June 30th, 2010. The policy was part of a broader effort to generate revenue while placing taxes on services associated with significant health risks. Now, I did want to call out that the tax doesn't apply to phototherapy services performed by a licensed medical professional, nor does it apply to certain gyms that offer tanning as an incidental service to members without a separately identifiable fee. All this to say, there were still loopholes. Unsurprisingly, the tanning industry pushed back. Salon owners argued that the tax would hurt small businesses, and industry advocates questioned the policy and the science behind it. The smaller, independent salons were right. The industry shrunk as a whole, with independent salons bearing the brunt. The tax accelerated the transition from businesses offering only tanning to including tanning as part of a larger wellness program as businesses strove to be excluded from the tax. The tanning industry now had a choice: adapt or disappear. It chose to adapt, but not by leaving UV tanning beds behind, at least not fully. And that brings us to the next chapter of the story: how an industry built around UV exposure began reinventing itself as something that looked a lot more like wellness. Next episode, we're going to hear from Corinne Madsen, Chief Brand Officer at the Glow Lounge, as we take a deeper look into the rise of self-tanning. What's particularly interesting about Corinne's story is that she used to work at a traditional tanning salon before pivoting into the sunless tanning space 15 years ago. It's an interesting juxtaposition, but it's also not a particularly unique one. Over the past several decades, tanning salons have found themselves operating in a very different cultural landscape. Consumers have more information about skin cancer. Sunless tanning products have improved dramatically. Spray tans are more accessible. And the beauty industry has slowly begun embracing the idea that intentionally exposing your skin to UV radiation might not be the best path to looking healthy. Traditional tanning salons had to evolve, and one of the strategies they've adopted is repositioning themselves as a wellness space. As I was researching for this podcast, I started getting served Spotify ads from a major player in the tanning industry. And what caught my attention wasn't that the ads were making blatantly false claims. In fact, that's what made them so interesting. The messaging was so subtle. Words like rejuvenation and wellness spa created an association between tanning and self-care without explicitly making any claims about the safety of UV exposure. One line in particular stood out to me. Combine our wellness spa services with tanning to maximize your glow both inside and out. Technically, those are two separate services, but put them next to each other under the umbrella of wellness, and the message becomes much more interesting. The implication isn't necessarily that UV tanning is healthy. It is far subtler than that. It's that you can come in for a wellness treatment, feel like you've taken care of yourself, and maybe while you're there, step into a tanning bed too. And that's what makes this kind of marketing so fascinating to me. The language doesn't have to tell you what to think. It just has to create an environment where you'll reach the conclusion on your own. And when an industry historically associated with UV exposure begins adopting the language of wellness, skincare, and rejuvenation, it's worth taking a closer look at what is actually being sold and what is simply being rebranded and carefully fed to you as something that it's not. One of the ways the industry is trying to reposition itself is through the use of red light therapy. Now let's pause for a moment, because before we can talk about how tanning salons are using red light therapy, I think we need to understand what red light therapy actually is, and perhaps more importantly, what it is not. On its own, red light therapy is not a problem. True red light therapy uses visible wavelengths of light and does not expose your skin to the UVA and UVB radiation emitted by tanning beds. But things become murkier when red light therapy and UV tanning are offered side by side, or worse, in the same device. Hybrid or combo tanning beds now combine red light technology with your traditional UVA and UVB tanning. As we have learned before, some salons have promoted red light therapy in a way that leads the consumer to believe it can help counteract or mitigate the damage associated with tanning. Yet again, the implication is so subtle. Yes, tanning might damage your skin, but don't worry, we have another service for that. There's just one problem. Skin doesn't necessarily work that way. You can't intentionally expose your skin to UV radiation, damage the DNA inside your skin cells, and then undo that damage with a few minutes of red light therapy. The biological processes are completely different because red light therapy supports cellular function while UV tanning beds cause DNA damage. One does not cancel out the other. But from a business perspective, the pairing is fascinating because the industry is no longer simply selling the problem. It can now sell you the supposed solution too. And that brings us back to the central question of this episode. When consumers begin questioning the product you built your industry around, what do? You evolve the product, you change the language, you embrace wellness, and you find new ways to keep customers walking through the door. We followed the financial incentives that resulted in grand industry pivots and misleading ads that kept the bulbs burning. Next time on Burnt Truths, we're tracing the surprising history of self-tanner, From accidental scientific discovery and orange palms to billion-dollar beauty brands and the products promising that perfect glow without the UV damage. This is Birth Truths, uncovering the shady side of getting sun-kissed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you're enjoying the series, be sure to rate, review, and share with someone who might find it interesting.